I woke up to an open window, and the chill from the air outside blowing stiff oxygen into my lungs. It caused me to sneeze endlessly, and I cussed at my carelessness at such a small detail. The floor was cold, almost damp when I stepped on it, and it caught my attention, even though, as with most things I did late in the night, I only regarded it passively. By the time I had walked to the window and pulled it shut, I knew I would have a difficult time falling back to sleep. I lay on my bed with my eyes wide open, and a mind wandering aimlessly at nothing in particular. A flirting glance at the ceiling, and I knew I could occupy my mind with some stimulation. I groped around the bed and finally picked up my phone from the tussled sheets. It felt warm, I perceived, probably from my long night of tossing and turning on it. I tapped on the screen and it came on. I glanced through the rows and columns of dancing icons, and I settled for my favorite social app, TikTok. I tapped on the icon, and it opened up. Shit, I cussed as the audio climbed sharply, tearing the tranquility in the night air. I brought the volume down to a comfortable note as I acknowledged the video of a butcher tearing into a large cut of red meat. I sighed in satisfaction at his skills as he brought that huge piece into small pieces that would be sold at his local meat store. He mentioned my street as his address, and it was convenient, even though I had yet to notice this meat cutter in his store. I rubbed my eyes and sniffed, making a mental note to visit the meat store when it was time for some cut. I tapped on the profile of the meat cutter in the video and sent a quick message, informing them of their good work. I told them I was around the neighborhood and I'd be visiting in the morning. When I clicked back, a reel rolled into play. The spectacle of a digitally constructed rabbit, huge enough to consume humans with the same nibbling swiftness that it chews vegetables, made me sweat. The rabbit had amber eyes that glowered lazily, almost indifferent to the cries of the digital humans. An unseen hand shoved the humans towards the rabbit, and even though they cried, the hand was unfeeling of their emotions. The rabbit was insatiable, and it chewed on these bloodless creations in such a manner that I quickly scrolled away from the video. "Thank you for checking our meat store. Do you mind a personal delivery instead?" I froze and read the message twice more. An ominous air wafted in through the windows, which I was sure I had just shut, and filled me with an awry feeling. I thought it was strange that they followed up with such a message. But when I shrugged, I gained some composure. I left the message and returned to the reels on their page, moving to the next video, which was of the meat cutter rubbing two knives against each other. "Why won't you answer me?" Another message popped up on my screen. The dry clangs of steel rubbing against each other made me uneasy, but it did not compare to the blood-stained rabbit outfit which the meat cutter wore. The eyes on the costume bore a similarity with that digitally created rabbit. And sensing a creepy coolness climb my legs, I began to reconsider browsing through my TikTok at such an hour and absorbing such content. The meat cutter dropped one of the knives on the table and pointed the other at the screen, and I noticed that the rabbit costume had an unsettling smile. I tossed the phone across away from me quickly. "What the hell?" I yelled, jumping away from my bed. I stood at the edge of the bed, watching my phone's home screen blink, shaken from the macabre content I had consumed at such an odd hour. I immediately regretted it. My throat was parched, and I needed water for it. I stormed out of my room door and was just about to make my way into the kitchen when a startling knock came on my main door. "Who's there?" I asked, breathless and panicking. "Hey, Dana," I heard Richard, my neighbor who was a writer by profession, call from outside the door, and I flushed with relief. Hey, Richard." I blushed, one hand on my chest to quell my fear. He wore a stern look which was unrecognizable. My blush waned. He stepped up to me with all of his manly bulk, and I stepped back, squeezing away in puzzlement as he took up the room around the door. "You called for a meat cutter. Why won't you answer?" he asked me viciously. I stuttered incoherently, confronted with his altering, horrible specter. He drew his hand out from his back and placed the rabbit mask over his scowl. My terror was complete. I was pale with fear. "In a Whitman 07, he muttered. I could not resist when I knew it was you the algorithm chose next. "No!" I squealed and turned around quickly. I raced towards my room, but my beating heart blurred my vision so much it appeared distant. The closest place of escape was my kitchen. I jumped in the door, and in the same motion, I shut it behind me. He cussed out, clanging his knife at the door. I flinched. He earned some room in the kitchen and owned it with his foot as a wedge. I pushed my legs apart and mustered all of my strength to stand firm. He pushed more forcefully, and my weight on the door was staggered briefly. His hand followed the same gap that I had inadvertently released to him, and he swung his knife. The blade ate into my skin with such a pricking sting that it made my eyes water. I shrieked. He withdrew the blade, and I heard him slurp. He moaned softly. "Sweet tasting. They'd love you on Meat Cutter's TikTok. Now let me in." I did not have it in me to resist him any further. My reality had collapsed into a simulation that I did not understand, and I was so scared and exhausted to wrap my head around it. I yielded the door before he could barge again. He stumbled in with his weight and faltered awkwardly as I watched without blinking, until he was impeded by the hard concrete of my kitchen cabinet. His body slumped, but his chest still rose and crashed in respiration. The world fell to silence as suddenly as chaos had erupted. "The cops!" I cried and rushed out of the kitchen. When the police arrived, Richard was still stunned by the knock to his head. In his fuzziness, he insisted that I had attacked him instead. The cops were not gullible, and as they led him away, I knew I would never see him again because I had planned a trip as far away as possible from where the weird meat cutter on TikTok could find me.
I was in the middle of drying the dishes when my phone pinged with a notification, almost vibrating off the side of the counter. Wiping my hands on the front of my jeans and tossing the drying cloth over the draining board, I grabbed my cell phone and opened up my notification bar. "You have one new follower." I smiled to myself. It was only a small accomplishment, but I've been trying to grow my Instagram following for the past few weeks, and every new person that followed me pushed me one step closer to my goal. Curious to see who it was, I opened the app and pulled up the profile of my new follower, Mr. Anonymous. Interesting username. He didn't have any posts and his follower count was empty, and when I checked out the people he was following, I was the only name there. It was probably a bot account or something, but hey, anything to get my numbers up. I was about to put the phone down when more notifications flooded the screen. Mr. Anonymous liked your photo. Mr. Anonymous liked your photo, plus 11. Given the flood of likes, he was most likely a spam account. With a shrug, I locked my phone and put it back on the counter as Mr. Anonymous proceeded to like all 72 of my photographs. I'd had a couple of accounts do that before in the past. As long as it didn't ruin my algorithm, I didn't mind the extra likes. Later that night, I was just about to head to bed when I got a new notification. I pulled it up on my phone and saw that Mr. Anonymous wanted to send me a message. I bit my lip, hesitating to click on it. I didn't want to be exposed to anything weird, but I supposed I was also kind of curious to see what he had to say, assuming it wasn't just a bot looking for engagement. Almost holding my breath, I opened the message. "Hey, I just wanted to say that I love your profile. Keep up the great work." I blinked in surprise, reading the message several times before it sunk in. He wasn't a bot after all, but a real person. And he liked my content? I couldn't help but smile at the unexpected praise. I typed out a response and clicked send, my stomach fluttering at the thought of a new fan. "Thanks, your support means a lot." He replied a few seconds later, almost as though he'd been waiting for my response. "You have great photographic abilities. Where did you learn?" "All self-taught," I replied, with an accomplished smile. "That's amazing." Was he genuinely just supporting my work? Or did he want something from me? It was always difficult to tell over social media, to gauge people's true intentions. It was far too easy to hide behind a screen. Words meant nothing if I couldn't figure out who the person was behind them. I decided to like his message without replying, since it was getting late and I was tired. I put my phone onto silent and set it down on the table beside my bed before switching the light off and going to sleep. I woke up the next morning to several more notifications waiting to be read, all from Mr. Anonymous. He had left some comments on my photos and had sent another message saying he'd like to speak some more. I wasn't sure how much I wanted to get involved, especially since his account was completely empty, but I figured it wouldn't hurt to send him another message, especially given how much he seemed to like my content. He ended up being pretty fun to talk to. We went from talking about photography and composition to things like movies and the weather. He was easy to talk to, unlike some other people, and he continued to support my content whenever I posted. Things continued like this for a week or so, before I started to wonder if he had ulterior motives after all. His comments went from general praise to zeroing in on specific details in my photos that gave away more information than I had intended. I tried to brush it off as him merely being observant, but things got worse when I posted a photograph of me outside a cafe down the road, holding a takeaway coffee cup in one hand and a chocolate cookie in the other. I'd never disclosed the city I lived in or any revealing details like that, but somehow, Mr. Anonymous managed to find out where the cafe was located just by searching up the name and matching the photograph I'd taken to photos of the cafe online. It didn't give away my exact address, but still, knowing which city I lived in was a breach of privacy I wasn't entirely comfortable with. Every time I posted a new picture to my profile, he would pick out something in the background that gave a clue as to where I lived. I started to feel uncomfortable with his interest and asked him why he was so determined to find out where I was. When he avoided the question, that's when I realized it was time to stop contacting him. I thought he had been a normal fan, but now it was bordering on being obsessive. Nothing good ever came from getting involved with these kinds of people. I decided to cut contact and block his account from being able to see my photos. I started to be more mindful about what I was posting, making sure there was nothing in the background that might reveal my location. I didn't hear from him for several weeks, and I thought the whole business was finished with. But it wasn't. About a month after Mr. Anonymous had first followed me, I was doing a live stream on my Instagram account, answering questions and talking to my followers. It had become a new staple of my profile, and I'd gained some new interest and success from doing it. I had my phone propped up on a tripod filming me while I read comments and responded to them. It was just after 7 o'clock, and dusk was starting to fall, shadows gathering around the room. Everything was perfectly fine until the comments started to change. It started with just one or two until the entire live stream was taken over by people saying the same thing. "Who's that at the window? Sarah, there's something behind you. Look behind you. There's someone standing at the window behind you." As soon as those messages started flooding the chat, dread churned through my stomach, and I was almost too scared to look. Turning my head, I glanced behind me. A face peered through the first floor window directly behind me, silhouetted by shadow from the fading sun. He was tall, having to bend his neck a little to peer beneath the frame, and didn't move when I locked eyes with him. He just stood there, watching me with a dark intensity in his eyes. After a moment, a slow smile began to spread along his face, the dusk distorting his features, and although I couldn't hear him through the glass, I saw the curve of his mouth as he spoke, the silent words burning in my mind. "Found you." Fear gripped me as I recalled our initial innocent conversations, which had seemed harmless at first. He was just another fan, or so I thought. With trembling fingers, I quickly ended the live stream, hoping that someone watching might call the police. But as I turned away from the window, a sense of unease washed over me. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my voice shaking as I explained the situation to the operator. She assured me that help was on the way, but each passing second felt like an eternity. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the window, afraid that he might disappear in a vague capture. Minutes felt like hours, but finally, I heard the sirens approaching. Relief washed over me as the police arrived and surrounded the area. As the police apprehended Mr. Anonymous, he laughed maniacally, claiming that he knew everything about me and would return soon. The idea that a stranger had been observing me from the shadows, gaining access to my private life, made my skin crawl. Over the next few days, the police discovered that Mr. Anonymous was not acting alone. He was part of a disturbing online network of cyberstalkers, each fixated on a different influencer. They exchanged tips and strategies for gathering information on their victims, turning their digital fame into a nightmare of invasion and terror. Mr. Anonymous was eventually convicted and sentenced to prison, but the damage he inflicted on my psyche was irreparable. I became paranoid, constantly looking over my shoulder and always double-checking my privacy settings. My once vibrant and outgoing personality withered away under the weight of constant fear. Even after the incident, the shadow of Mr. Anonymous lingered. The sense of security I once had was shattered, and I couldn't escape the nagging feeling that there might be others out there lurking in the digital shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. My days as an Instagram influencer came to an abrupt end. I retreated from the online world, seeking refuge in the anonymity of the real world. The once beloved platform became a symbol of my vulnerability, a reminder of how easily the line between admiration and obsession could blur. Now my life is a quiet existence away from the spotlight, but the memory of that evening still haunts me. I will forever be looking over my shoulder, haunted by the chilling words that Mr. Anonymous uttered. Found you. A chilling reminder of the disturbing world lurking behind the screens we so willingly open our lives to.
My name is Jesse, and I usually don't use social media. Back in high school, I was a bit of a cyberbully. I constantly gossiped and badmouthed people. And one time, I even catfished my friend Vanessa. She ended up in front of an abandoned warehouse, hoping to meet her completely made-up boyfriend Michael. She was all dressed up and everything. It was fun, but also pretty mean. Ever since then, I've definitely straightened out. I deleted all my social media accounts and vowed that I would never hurt people like that again. I spent 5 years barely using the internet at all. But on my 25th birthday, I was out with my coworkers and I realized that I needed to make some new friends. I also needed a boyfriend. I was definitely in a social rut and I wanted to fix that. So when I got back home, I created new accounts on Facebook, Instagram, and even Twitter. I tried to track down all my old friends, but I guess I burned a lot of bridges in the past. Very few of my old friends accepted my friend request, and the ones that did were just acquaintances at best. I was really kind of a bitch in the past, but I've grown up so much. I just wanted people to give me a second chance. About a week after opening my accounts, I got a private message on Facebook Messenger from a guy named Tony. I didn't know him, but his profile picture was very handsome. We started chatting and hit it off right away. We had a lot of the same interest, and he seemed like a really good listener. We messaged each other until 3 in the morning. The next day, I saw that Tony friended me on all the other socials. I accepted him as a friend, of course. We hadn't even met him yet, but I was already excited to get to know him. We ended up talking every night for the next week. I asked if he wanted to meet up, and he said, "Not yet." He lived in the same city, but he was still out of town on business. He said he'd get back on Sunday and we'd meet then. One night as we were messaging, he asked me why I had just joined social media. At first, I didn't want to answer, but he was persistent. So I told him everything, about the bullying, the catfishing, all of it. I was really embarrassed of the person I used to be, but I really liked this guy and I wanted to be as honest with him as possible. He understood, and he didn't judge me. In fact, some of my wilder stories got him a bit worked up, in a good way. What started as my honest confession of past mistakes led to him calling me a dirty girl and asking me what I was wearing. I never really sexted with guys I hadn't met before. I'd rather just meet them in person, but he really got me going. We sent some pretty explicit messages to each other. One thing led to another, and I ended up sending him some. He said he'd do the same, but as soon as he got my photos, he stopped messaging me altogether. This was when I knew I'd made a mistake. I looked up the company where he supposedly worked, and it didn't exist. I cross-checked his profile picture and found out that it was a stock photo. If you search for a handsome white businessman on Google, his photo was third from the top. I felt like a real idiot, but I was also furious. I messaged him in every way I could, but when it was clear that he wasn't going to respond, I gave up and went to bed. When I woke up the next morning, my phone had 80 messages from pretty much everyone I knew. I guess Tony or whoever he was had stuck all my naked photos on Reddit and then linked to it on every other social network. Most of the messages were from my family members who were not happy. My mom even said she wanted to disown me. And the rest were from my supposed friends, but most of them were gloating and surprisingly mean. They seemed happy with my public embarrassment. Trisha, one of my oldest friends, said that I got what was coming to me. Tracy, my best friend since 2nd grade, wrote on my Facebook, "Vanessa finally got you back." So, Tony didn't exist. It was all a scheme cooked up by Vanessa. I was so angry, but I also had a certain level of guilt. I really had hurt her, and I guess she wanted to hurt me back. But all things considered, I had much more anger than guilt. What she did was so much worse than some stupid childhood prank. I opened Facebook, which had already taken down the link and blocked Tony's account, and I looked up Vanessa's real page. It didn't have her address, but it had her workplace. So I got in my car and I drove straight to Vanessa's office building. She worked for a company called Harding & Son. I had no idea what they did, but they'd seemed like a really nice place. I found her sitting in a dimly lit cabin. She was looking at her computer, so she didn't see me until I was standing right in front of her. "Hi, Tony," I said. Vanessa literally jumped out of her chair. She tried to tell me that she had no idea what I was talking about, but I knew that she was lying. Whenever she lied, her stutter came out. That was one of the things that I teased her about when we were younger. Vanessa grabbed her office phone and pressed a single button, probably for security. Before she could say anything into the phone, I grabbed it and threw it onto the desk. "Don't hurt me," she said. "I won't," I said. "As long as you take those photos down and apologize." "Me? Apologize?" she shouted. "You made my life miserable when we were growing up. I was afraid to go to school because of you. The way you criticized my hair or my clothes, and then when you tricked me into going to that awful warehouse." "I'm sorry for being a bully," I said. "I really am. I should have apologized sooner." I just stood there staring at her. I was waiting for her to apologize in return. Vanessa looked at me with a cold, unyielding stare. There was no hint of forgiveness in her eyes, only a glint of something dark and unsettling. "Oh, Jesse," she replied, her voice dripping with a chilling calmness. "Apologize won't erase the scars you left on me. You tormented me for years, and now it's time for you to experience the same pain." I felt a wave of fear wash over me as Vanessa's words sank in. But before I could respond, she revealed her sinister plan. "You see, Jesse, leaking your pictures was just the beginning. I wanted to shatter your life just like you shattered mine. And now, I have something even more twisted in store for you." I tried to back away, but the door behind me was already shut, leaving me trapped in her office. Panic consumed me as Vanessa approached, a wicked smile playing on her lips. She took out a small, ominous-looking vial from her desk and held it up before my eyes. "This," she said, her voice laced with malice, "is a concoction of my own making. A potion that will make you live every single moment of torment you put me through. You'll experience the fear, humiliation, and pain over and over again, just like I did." Before I could comprehend what was happening, Vanessa forcefully poured the potion down my throat. The world around me began to spin, and a searing pain tore through my body. The room blurred, and I felt myself being transported back in time, back to the years when I was a heartless bully. I was trapped in a nightmarish loop, reliving every cruel taunt, every hurtful remark, and every malicious act I'd ever committed against Vanessa and others. The pain and guilt were overwhelming, and I begged for mercy, but there was no escape from the relentless torment. Time lost all meaning as I became a prisoner of my own past, reliving my darkest moments on an endless loop. Each cycle felt longer and more excruciating than the last, and I yearned for release, for a chance to repent and be free of this torment. But Vanessa showed no mercy. She reveled in my suffering, taking sadistic pleasure. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, yet there was no end in sight to the tortuous cycle. In the end, my mind shattered under the weight of my own guilt and remorse. I became a mere shell of my former self, lost in the never-ending maze of my past. The world outside moved on, oblivious to the horror that had consumed me.
Home at last. I breathed out a sigh of relief. I had just come home after another utterly exhausting day, spent trying to teach the students who, quite frankly, did not want to be taught. It was a painstaking experience, yet somehow rewarding. And the only real thing keeping me all together at this point was my beautiful girlfriend, Jennifer. I met Jennifer just over a year ago now, and, well, it was her who was there for me, waiting on the sofa every night I came home from work, ready to spend the evening watching movies together. "Jennifer, I'm home," I shouted as I turned my key into the lock, only to realize the door was unlocked. I walked in, pushing the door aside with ease. The sofa was empty. She wasn't there. Considering she had been in the same place every single day without fail for a year, I have to admit I was rather shocked, even a little anxious. "Jennifer?" I called out a little quieter this time. My eyes had been transfixed on the fridge door, staring at a note stuck to it. I paced over to it, my heartbeat steadily increasing, and grabbed the note. It was printed out. "Dear beloved Tobias, I had to leave for an urgent business trip and will be gone for the next 2 days. Miss me, for I will be back on Friday. Can't wait to see you. Lots of love, Jennifer." Back on Friday? Out for business? What? Jennifer worked at a local cafe in town nearby. How could she possibly be needed there for 2 days straight? It baffled me, and I had a hell of a lot of trust in Jennifer. So whatever she was up to, I'm sure it was nothing. I guess I could catch up on some action movies. Jennifer hated those. My smile lightened up, but my eyes stayed solemn and still. Something felt off. I decided to ignore it for now. The next day. "Morning, Toby. Had a good evening yesterday?" One of the other teachers, Paul, spoke to me with a harsh glare. "Yeah, fine, thanks. My girlfriend's out of town, so it was a little bit lonely, but she's back on Friday." He chuckled. "Yeah, it's always like that, isn't it?" His glare faded, and reassumed drinking his morning coffee. "Yeah." I giggled a little under my breath, like Paul had been in any kind of relationship in his lifetime with that coffee breath. "Did you hear about the new teacher?" A voice in the corner of the staff room whispered. "Yeah, I heard she just transferred in. It'll be nice to have someone new around the place," Paul said. My footsteps beat heavily against the blue-carpeted floor in the hall, a direct contrast to the quiet taps of the woman walking ahead of me, appearing to have just walked out of the head office. I was about to hurry and greet her, but her hair, such a violent shade of red. It stopped me dead in my tracks, and I froze for a moment. Her hair reminded me of someone I wish I had forgotten. My ex, Amelia. Amelia was the devil, Satan's accursed, evil incarnated. There were so many words I could use to describe her, but it seemed those related to the devil himself were barely enough to convey the horrors that lied within that vile creature I had once deemed my lover. I broke up with her long ago and moved far away. I didn't want her following me, and remembering just some of the tortures she put me through seemed like enough to make my eyes water and my legs chatter in fear of her return. Often, when I would return from work, she would follow me without my knowledge, just to make sure I wasn't cheating. She would plant pills in my food that increased anxiety and drowsiness in me to keep me dependent on her. At night, she would stare at me, waiting for me to fall asleep, and then take my phone and go through every single message, scanning them for any signs of cheating. I wasn't my own person, it seemed. I was hers. No. I stopped myself. I was in such a good place right now, I couldn't possibly even put the thought of her in my mind. I couldn't take it. She left scars so unimaginable to the average person that only those with a similar story could understand. But I certainly needed to know whether the lady down at the end of the corridor was Amelia, for my own sake, and for the sake of Jennifer. I knocked against the wooden bulwark of a door. "Come in," I heard a deep voice call out. I hurried in and slammed the door shut behind me as quickly as I could. "What the devil are you doing, Tobias?" Mr. Puffin, the head, was now standing up from his chair, staring at me with his jaw wide open. "The new teacher. Who is she?" I regained civility and walked calmly over to him, though my heart was beating too fast for me to contain it for very long. You mean Scarlett. She'll be joining your department, Tobias. Please, take good care of her. She seems incredibly eager, and I want it to stay that way. Maybe her attitude will rub off on some of the students." My eyes sunk, and I breathed a deep sigh of relief. Okay, yeah, no problem at all. I was just a little surprised when I saw her. She reminded me of someone I knew from a while back. He nodded, and before his mouth could open, the bell rang, and it was time for lessons. The next day came around, yet another evening of being alone. It was Friday, and thankfully Jennifer would be back. 2 long nights had passed without her, and I really did need her. I felt so lost without her. I walked into the school, my smile seeming to reflect off the very windows of the corridor as I trekked onwards to my classroom. The bell rang soon after I had reached, and students stormed in like a stampede of wildebeests. They seemed oddly excited today. For learning, I hoped. They sat down momentarily, and the classroom died in silence. The entire room appeared to have engulfed in misery, yet an air of anticipation ruled the skies. "Mr. Norfolk," one of the girls in the front called me as I began opening up the PowerPoint lesson. "Yes, Carrie," I asked. "Do you know the new teacher, Mrs. Scarlett? We all think she likes you." My heart felt as though the vessels had all disconnected. My world was vanishing into the dark void of fear as I heard the muffled sounds of students laughing in the background. You mean the teacher with red hair?" I was verging on collapsing. "Please, don't let it be her." "Yes, sir. We all heard she really misses you." That was it. I hushed them. Continue with the lesson until the second bell rang, and then the students left. I grabbed the bin and vomited. Suddenly, I wasn't feeling very well. I had this really bad feeling. I drove home that night knowing that I had to tell everything to Jennifer. I hid Amelia from her for so long. I didn't want her knowing what horrors lied in my past, but perhaps I should have. It was going to be all too difficult to explain that my ex was a dangerous criminal, and we needed to move now. Once I parked outside, I rushed to the apartment as quickly as I could. Taking a second glance, however, I ran back to my car and took something out of my glove box for precaution. She had already found what school I worked in. What was stopping her from finding my house? I continued running back up the stairwell, and upon reaching the door, I called out, Jennifer, pack your things. There's someone after us. I don't know how long we have, but..." "Hello, Toby." Everything went numb. The space around me had gone. Only the sofa and who was on it was in my focus now. I couldn't breathe. "Well, why are you just standing there, honey? Don't you miss me? Come here, and I'll give you a big old kiss to make up to you." That foul witch. What did she do to Jennifer? "Where the hell is Jennifer?" I shouted. My veins were bursting with venomous blood. "Right here, Toby. Take a look." Amelia showed me a video which showed Jennifer's whole body buried inside the earth. Only her head was out. What have you done to her? Where is she? I screamed. This is the garbage you've been seeing? My dear Toby, as we speak, the garbage is going to the place where it belongs. Amelia laughed, then smashed her phone into the wall. Fear gripped me as I saw her face. The devil inside her had come out. You chose that sack of shit over me? How could you? You think you can have your fun with me and then dump me like a piece of shit for another woman? And when I confronted you, you published my intimate pictures on Reddit. You destroyed my life, Toby. I wasn't always like this, but because of what you did and those pills you stuffed into me, I turned into a monster. Her eyes darted towards the window as she spoke. You think only you can play the victim card? Those were the last words spoken by Amelia. Then she jumped out of the window. The next day, I received an email from the university. It was a termination letter sent by Mr. Puffin. Apparently, Amelia had revealed everything with solid proof to my university, as well as the police. I was arrested in no time. I later came to know that Jennifer was safe and left the house only because Amelia asked her to. Amelia was crazy. She could never understand that men have needs. We gotta do what we gotta do. I know you would understand, my dudes. She destroyed my relationship as well as my reputation. I hope she rots in hell.